Welcome to Reflections Over Coffee, the video version of my newsletter. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based out of California. The purpose of this video blog is to provide tips and education and clarity and insight on how to gain healthier relationships. On this week's newsletter, I discuss why we keep our walls up. When we keep our walls up in relationships, we are often moving through our relationships with a guarded perspective, meaning that we don't feel safe. We don't feel safe around people. We don't feel safe in the world. We may not even feel safe within our own selves to make the best possible judgment in our relationships or the best possible decisions in our relationships. So we keep these emotional barriers, which are designed to keep people at a distance or out of our hearts or from connecting with us or from knowing too much information about us altogether. And I want to talk a little bit with you about why we do this. There's a few different reasons as to why we do this. And, last week I recorded a podcast where it talked about how human beings were wired for attachment, but we're wired for survival first, which means that our bodies and our brains are always moving in ways and are acting in ways that's going to best benefit you and protect you for survival right from the very start. And the brain and the heart are no different. And when we keep our walls up in our relationship, usually there's a variety of reasons that we do this. And I definitely want to get into it. And before I go any further, just so you know, if I look down and look back up, it's because I have notes. So I'm glancing at those to make sure I hit every single bullet point. All right. So the first reason that we keep our walls up is one, we're holding on to emotions that are negative. So that could be that we have post-traumatic stress, or some sort of trauma related to relationships, or just some trauma related to a breakup. It could be a friendship. It could be family relationships that, that have been with us for a long time. And we learned very early on, or at some point, that when we gave ourselves to someone or we trusted someone, we learned that we got burned very easily when our intentions were very pure, when our love was pure, and the other person, for whatever reason, was not. And that could be that it was due to abuse. It could be that it was due to, narcissistic abuse. It could be due to financial abuse. It could be due to, substance abuse or any type of outlying or extraneous factor that kind of led to the other person doing what they did to us. All we know is that we suffered some very detrimental consequences. And part of what we're experiencing is that we are unable to let go of those emotions, move on and disconnect. And sometimes that could be related to grief around letting relationships go. It could be related to anger, related to the pain that that person inflicted upon us. It could be due to just not really understanding how to reconnect with people after we've gone through such a detrimental situation. So there's a variety of different factors that play a part in terms of why our emotions are the way that they are. They're kind of stuck in this negative pattern. And again, that could be anger, that could be bitterness, that could be resentment, that could be sadness. It could be any variety of negative emotions, which have manifested itself to the point where, hey, I'm just not going to be able to trust anybody. And which leads me to the second point. We keep our walls up because we want to prevent ourselves from getting hurt. We learned once, we let our guard down, we got hurt. Hey, so if we don't open ourselves up, we don't make ourselves vulnerable, we're not intimate, and I'm talking about emotional intimacy here, then there's no way that we can get hurt, right? We don't, in our minds, the equation is logical. We don't let anybody in, I don't get hurt. And in actuality, that is a lot further from the truth. Unless you are a person that is very content with being a hermit and just not having any sort of outside contact with the outside world, which there are very few of us that are wanting to do that. But there's a lot of people that tell themselves this narrative: I don't need anyone. I'm okay. I'm good to be by myself. I'm very independent. I don't want to need anybody. When in all actuality, underneath those thoughts is that they do want somebody. They do want a relationship. They do want a friendship. They do want a family. However, they've sort of, again, trained their brain, or their brain has trained them into thinking that, hey, this is what's best for me. I'm not going to want this. So on some level, you're telling yourselves this, but underneath, you do have this secret longing. And one of the reasons why this is an issue is because for folks that really do have this deep sense of longingness, and yearning to want to connect with people, but they still have this wall up, what they will do is they will isolate themselves, or they will cut people off, or they will keep themselves at a distance from people for quite some time. And then at some point in their life, they may decide that they want to act on, um, this deep sense of longingness, whether it be that they finally found a friend or someone that they feel like they can connect with, maybe a long lost family member, or, maybe someone has showed interest and they've decided to start dating. Because you have been closed off for so long, what typically tends to happen is you rush into a relationship, or there's not a thorough assessment of this person. And so again, what that looks like is, because you've been disconnected from for so long from the outside world and from these relationships, there's a part of you that's not as well trained. And I hate to say the word trained, but it's a part of your body, your brain, that's not as well trained to flesh out the bad people, to go through and see what differentiates persons from good or bad, or the fact that people can be human and make mistakes. What tends to happen is, when you have this type of thinking and your wall is up, it's black and white thinking. It's either all or nothing. So what that means is you're either invested 100% in that relationship, and usually things go very, very quickly. You guys you may experience some codependency, where you feel like, everything you do is together, or some sort of enmeshment, whereas this is like your only friend, your only partner. And so this partner becomes your everything. And then what happens is that person makes a mistake. Or that person commits a betrayal, or that person has some traits that are very similar to people that have hurt you in the past. And so basically history can repeat itself, or this person can be condemned for committing an infraction. And the reason being is because everything that you do, you've kind of put this person on a pedestal, and so everything they do then becomes your focal point in your eyes for how relationships should be. And then your brain is kind of already wired, that you should have these walls up, so you very quickly retreat. And any sort of infraction becomes that confirmation that, see, people are not trustworthy. You made the right decision when you were by yourself and you were in isolation and you didn't trust anybody. And so any sort of infraction or hurt or wounding then becomes confirmation for something that your brain has been trained to filter for. The third reason that I should say, the third reason I should say is the reason why we keep our walls up is because we don't want our mistakes. We don't want our private lives. We don't want our vulnerabilities used against us. So very early on in a relationship, we've learned that, hey, if we disclose information to somebody, if we talk about things that hurt us, or things that we go through, or hardships that we experience, when that person gets upset with us, or when there's a falling out, if you will, what will then happen is that person will then, in the heat of the moment, in anger or in meanness, may use our vulnerabilities against us as a method of attack. And so we've learned to just sort of shut ourselves off, be guarded, and keep our wall up and not tell anybody anything because we don't ever want that information out there. We don't ever want it used against us as a method of attack. And we don't want people to catch us when we are weak. And so we want to put on this image that we're always strong, and we just don't want to give anybody any sort of ammunition. Fourthly, what I wanted to say is that we want to protect our inner peace. You know, a lot of times when we let our walls down, especially if they've been up for quite some time, we're not really sure, we're not really sure how to feel. And that gives us a great amount of anxiety because we don't know how to do intimacy. We may not know how to do healthy relationships. We may not know how to do vulnerability. We may not know how to do certain things. And so when we do actually start to let people in, it can feel very foreign. It can feel much like a betrayal to yourself or like you're doing something wrong that you're not supposed to be. And so therefore it's very disruptive to your inner peace, and it can have you feeling very anxious, like, should I trust this person? Can I trust this relationship? What if this person ends up betraying me? Why did I decide to trust this person all of a sudden? Can I trust myself? Those sort of ruminative thoughts that you may have. And so that might be why. And so, one of the next bullet I should mention is that, part of that is that we've been conditioned not to trust people. And conditioning can come from a variety of different ways. It could come from messages that you received from your parents or caregivers early on. They may have taught you through their own stories, through their own narratives, through their own experiences. Hey, the world is not to be trusted. All people are this or all people are that, and so you may have incorporated their narratives, when parents go through a high conflict divorce, and mom or dad wins sole custody, right? What are your narratives, or what then do the narratives become about other men or other women? And so it could be negative narratives that have come from those parental or guardian figures early on in your life. And so that's something to monitor, whether or not your narratives, your perspectives, your inner voice, your inner dialogue, if that's actually coming from you, or if that's coming from your sort of being around someone else, you're being influenced by someone else's thoughts. And that can also happen when you're in a specific work culture. If you're in a toxic work group, you can inherit sort of that ability to not trust people, or the people that you work with are untrustworthy, or they gossip, or they talk crap about everyone. So there's other ways that this can definitely be influenced in order for you to keep your walls up. I know that this happened a lot when I worked in corrections, is that it was kind of like a crabs in a bucket mentality. And so everyone kind of talked about everyone. There was no trust. People would stab you in the back because people are trying to climb into leadership positions, or people just want to assert authority, or people may have some things going on at home and then come to work and kind of try to take that on others. So that could be another example of why that comes up. When next, what I should say is when we've been hurt, a lot of times what we do, especially if we have been in abusive relationships, the way that the abusive person maintains power is by making you think that things are your fault. And so, it causes you to internalize blame and work harder to try and please that abusive personality. I mean, there's coercive control, there's gaslighting, and other sort of manipulative tactics, can't talk there, that influence how you're sort of moving in that relationship. And when that relationship is over, that narrative or that conditioning doesn't stop unless you are intentional about undoing the hard wiring. And usually you have to do that with the assistance of someone else. I don't know that I've met anybody that's just kind of been able to undo a lot of that negative sort of black and white thinking on their own without the assistance of anyone. And so, what that looks like is that we don't trust our own judgment. We internalize our ability to make decisions and say that, the reason why we've had certain experiences with certain people that haven't been good to us in the past is because we made an erroneous decision. We may feel like we're stupid. We may feel like we're unworthy. We may just feel like we just don't have that ability to make good decisions, right? Which leads me to the next point is that, you may be feeling that you are a magnet for attracting abusive and toxic people. And so you've noticed that, hey, I'm looking around myself, or I'm taking an inventory and evaluation of my past relationship history, and I'm noticing something in common. I'm noticing that, all of these relationships are very similar. All of them have very controlling personalities, or there's some element of abuse that has taken place. So it must be me. I hear a lot of people say that, hey, I'm the common denominator, and the whole common denominator thing in my mind, I get what people are saying, but if, in my mind, of course you're going to be the common denominator. It's your life. So in your life, there's certain things that we do, certain patterns that we have, certain behaviors that we have, certain just people that we're attracted to, until we we sit down and we really and truly evaluate it and are intentional about working on that. And so there's something about the abuse dynamic. Again, when you go back to what I was saying at the very beginning, there's an element that your brain is maybe wired for that, especially if you have long standing history of abuse, or if you've had elements of pretty severe child abuse or neglect, or just, any type of abuse during early childhood experiences. And then you're more apt to be prone to abusive relationships, right, later on. And so your brain is there's something in the way that, again, your brain filters for certain characteristics in people. Your brain filters for certain situations that seem familiar to you. And there's a deeper reason that these things continue to happen, other than you're not a trustworthy person. Quite often when I'm talking with my clients, what I feel like I get from them is that, hey, there's a lot more than they can't trust themselves. There's a lot more going on, because a lot of times what they will typically have is they will have an inkling that something's not right here, or there's something about this person and I can't really put my finger on it. And then they'll dismiss what they think initially about that person. And so they'll kind of just blow past that red flag and then continue doing what they're doing, because they're dismissing what they're thinking, or other people have convinced them that there's some error in their thinking, or something else is happening there. So it's not quite 100% that you can't trust yourself. It's something about that interaction that, even though you trust yourself, you discount the trust that you do have for yourself, and you start to override that with things that you want to be true. You may not have necessary evidence for it, or someone could be telling you something and you kind of want to believe it's true, but again, there's no evidence, or the evidence is to the contrary, but you just want so much to believe that it's true. Okay. And so I hope that that's kind of been telling you why we do those things, why we keep our walls up. And now I want to kind of get into a little bit of what can help you to break those walls down. Most people who have their walls up, they know that their walls are up, right? And they know that they're doing it for a particular reason. So, one is that you have to have the motivation to want to change that, because there's a lot of people that, right now that are probably listening to this, or probably thinking about this, and they're like, yeah, I have my walls up, but I don't want to change anything about that. I don't see that as being a problem. I don't see that's helped me more than it's not helped me. You know what I'm saying? So I'm good. So I think the first thing you have to do in order to take your walls down is to, one, have that awareness, and two, have that motivation that you definitely, that something needs to change, that this is impacting you socially, this is impacting you emotionally, it's impacting your ability, at work or other situations, or it's impacting your ability to live out your dreams and your goals to the fullest. It's keeping you from living the best version of yourself. You know what I mean? So you would have to have that awareness and that insight and also that motivation. And two, if you have that started out with that awareness and that motivation to change, I would say that going to therapy is a great way to combat that. Talking with a therapist, someone who is trained to help you kind of look at those patterns, help you sort of break those walls down, talk about your issues with distrust, talk about the origins of where that comes from and how that impacts your feelings, your behaviors, your motivation, and helping you to outline and accomplish some clear and concise treatment goals to overcome that, right? So you want to work through maybe some mini goals towards building trust. You may want to work through larger goals of building trust because it might mean that you, at some point, you want to get married, right? Or some things you may want to have children of your own, and you don't want to pass down your thoughts of distrust to your children, right? Or you may notice that it's impacting you in some other way. But again, going to a good, solid therapist that's trained in doing this, in breaking down those walls and helping your client learn to trust, which again, even going to therapy in and of itself is a great way to build trust because, if you trust your therapist, there's proof that it can be done. Right, it's proof that you can trust someone. It's proof that your walls can come down when you're working through someone, right? And that's a big part of therapy is trusting, intimacy, and vulnerability, breaking down those walls and taking a closer look at your stuff, your baggage. And it's not pretty and it's not meant to be, but it's very courageous when people do that. Reading self-help books are another way to kind of glean that, so kind of looking at books like Emotional Blackmail, or even books around inner critic or inner voice work, or even books that deal with toxic relationships, that will help you look at your relationship history, right? Where that sort of that distrust narrative comes from, looking at childhood abuse if you have that. So just sort of looking at what's happening. And if you really want to get into it, maybe even looking at some biopsychosocial stuff where it really kind of gets into the neurology of your brain functioning and why you are wired the way you are. So a couple of books that I'm thinking about are, Attached. Those are really good in talking about attachment styles, but also talking about the way your brain is wired. Wired for Love is another good book that I'm thinking of. Women Who Love Too Much is a great book that kind of talks about this in a softer, more gentler approach. And there's a lot of inner voice books that talk about that, and also just building um, trusting relationships, and also books on how to build relationships and friendships, that you can take a look at. So there's quite a few books on that. And so, yeah, that definitely helps to do that. And, also to when going to therapy and doing self-help books, it's also good if you have somebody that's close to you that can be an accountability person that knows that you're working on it, and they're also very solid with their relationships, like they're historically around them, that they have good relationships or good relational patterns, and that they can kind of help keep you on track or in check and say, hey, you're doing this, you're doing that. So people that are supportive to you, if you have that, that's a good way to do it. Support groups are another good way to do it if you don't have somebody in a right now due to COVID. There's a lot of good support groups that are online. So if you are an adult child, meaning that you came from a dysfunctional family, there's a lot of you know, adult child of alcoholics, adult child of narcissistic parents. There's adult children who've been emotionally abused. There's a lot of great self-help groups where you can build connections based on that in terms of working on your healing, as well as great memberships and coaching programs that will also can also be beneficial in addition to therapy. So that's something. And thirdly, what I would like to say is if, reflecting on evidence that you have around not trusting people. And again, that may come with the work of a very good therapist, but what evidence do you have to support the all or nothing thinking? Meaning that you either trust people 100% or you don't trust them at all versus, maybe someone was human and couldn't be available for you at a certain point, but it doesn't mean that they don't care for you. And so are you kind of just saying it's all or nothing, like you're either my friend or if you commit some sort of infraction, then you're not being a very good friend and you're very quick to dismiss or discard or discount the relationship. And so start taking an evidence-based approach and looking at your relationships or about a relationship assessment. It's always nice to kind of reflect on your relationship and see if they are pouring into you more than they are taking from you. And if you have relationships that are taking more out of you, that might be one of the reasons why you're keeping your walls up. And so it might be that it's not all people. It could just be that it's the situation where you're surrounded by a bunch of people that kind of pull from you. And again, that could be a work environment, that could be a volunteer situation, that could be, a hobby club or something like that. I don't know, but it could be any number of situations and where you feel like the energy is taking more from you. It could even be, I've even had people, talk about spiritual church hurt, where the church also draws from you energetically, or sometimes they may do more harm than good. So taking a look at that, if they're constantly sort of pulling you down, again, evaluate that and seeing how much, again, you're kind of getting from that. And then um, and so you want to, again, kind of assess your relationship for toxicity and abusiveness. And part of doing that assessment is saying, do I need a change of scenery? Is it too much for me that it's overwhelming, or it's that these relationships or this environment is bleeding over into my personal life. And so, do I need to maybe have a change of scenery? Do I need to get some new friends? What is it that I need to do if these things are pulling me down? And then what I mentioned before, lastly, the last point I want to mention in terms of, you know, reconstructing your life and taking those walls down is thinking about how you want your life to look in the future, and does it jive with your thinking, right? So if at some point you feel like, hey, I'm single, but I prefer to be single, I really don't trust people, I really don't trust situations to get out there and date, but somewhere in the back of your mind you want to get married and have a family. When you start thinking about those long-term goals, you realize how much out of alignment that thinking works against you, right? Those patterns work against you. If you don't trust someone, how can you be married in a healthy, loving relationship? If you can't be intimate, you can't be vulnerable. And what if you want to be a great parent, and work through your stuff so that it doesn't carry on to your kids? How much in alignment is that thinking with your goal patterns? So just thinking about that. And so I want to stop there and let you know that this video isn't all inclusive about every everything that you can do to break your walls down. And of course, it's not a one size fits all. Everyone may have, people have different situations, and I totally get that. So it's not a necessarily one size fits all. This is just more or less the generality of what I've experienced in working with my clients and with myself also too, right? Because therapists also have to do their own work to break through their own stuff, right? And so that this is hopefully it will get you thinking, and it will give you some motivation to take a look at where you're at, tear those walls down so that you can get the kind of life that you feel like you deserve or that you've been longing for secretly, because I believe that you deserve it too. And if you like this video, be sure to share it, like it, and subscribe to this YouTube channel, as I will definitely be posting more videos. And I appreciate you sitting with me this morning on your reflection over coffee this week. And until next time, folks, be well. Take care.